You are looking at an illegal military tank that you can actually drive on the street. This is the Chevy CUCV. To a normal person, it looks like a rusted old Blazer, but under that camouflage paint is a military machine built to survive a nuclear winter. While modern trucks are full of fragile plastic and safety sensors that shut you down in a car wash, the Army demanded something different. They took a standard Chevy frame and stuffed it with a 900-pound iron diesel engine and a 24-volt electrical system designed to jump-start a literal tank. It has no ignition key, it has no emissions gear, and it was built to run on everything from jet fuel to kerosene. But there is a deadly secret hidden in the dashboard that forced the government to ban these from civilian auctions for years. Why was the toughest Chevy ever built considered too dangerous for the American road? By 1981, the Army's truck fleet was falling apart, and the brass at TACOM was staring down a budget spreadsheet that looked like a bad joke. The cost of building a purpose-built military truck from scratch had ballooned out of control. The old Dodge M880s were rusting out, and the Humvee was still a drawing on some engineer's napkin. So the Army did something unthinkable. They went shopping like regular people. They wanted a truck you could buy off the lot, except it had to survive a war zone and run on whatever you could pour into the tank. A memo from TACOM that year spelled it out. The procurement of a commercial utility cargo vehicle, CUCV, shall leverage civilian production to achieve cost reductions and rapid fielding. In other words, get something cheap, tough, and ready now. That is how General Motors found itself in the crosshairs. The Army's 1981 market study landed on the Chevy CK pickup as the base. Not because it was perfect, but because it was everywhere. Parts in every junkyard, mechanics in every town, and a frame that could take a hit. This was not a love letter to Detroit engineering. It was a desperate move to keep the wheels turning without bankrupting the Pentagon. TACOM's directive was simple. Take the civilian Chevy, rip out the plastic, bolt in a diesel that could run on JP8, and wire it so you could jump-start a tank. The accountants wanted a price tag closer to a farm truck than a Bradley fighting vehicle. GM's assembly line in Flint, Michigan was tapped to crank out tens of thousands of these vehicles. The contract DAE0782C4060 called for more than 53,000 units. By the end, over 70,000 rolled off the line. That is the origin story. Not some secret bunker, just a budget crisis and a pile of procurement memos. The CUCV was born from cost-cutting, not Cold War bravado. But that is what makes it brilliant. It is a civilian workhorse in military drag, built for the end of the world, but priced for a government that could not afford anything else. Next stop, Flint, Michigan, where the iron gets real. The first time I laid eyes on a CUCV, it was parked half-buried in Michigan snow behind the depot, green paint peeling, diesel breath hanging in the air. The Army brass called it a commercial utility cargo vehicle, but the mechanics in the lot just called it the cockroach. Because if everything went sideways, grid down, missiles in the air, nuclear winter, this was the truck you would want. Not because it was pretty, because it was built to keep moving when nothing else would. The program brief did not mince words: survivability in all environments. In the early 80s, every procurement memo had the Cold War hanging over it like a bad hangover, and the phrase nuclear winter started creeping into the scuttlebutt. No, you will not find those exact words in the contract, but that is how it got passed down. The truck had to run on whatever you poured into it: diesel, jet fuel, even filtered motor oil if you were desperate. It had to start after an electromagnetic pulse, after a blizzard, after you had left it for dead. The Army wanted a machine that did not care if the world ended. That is why they went analog. No computers, no black boxes, no sensors waiting to fry. Just steel, wires, and a starter that could double as a boat anchor. The electrical system was the first clue you were not in Kansas anymore. 2 alternators, 24 volts, a NATO slave port up front, so you could jump start a tank or run field radios off the same bus. Under the dash, a resistor bank that looked like it belonged in a power station, not a Chevy. The first time I traced the wiring, I thought this is either genius or madness. But that is what the nuclear winter talk did. It made the engineers paranoid, and paranoia makes for some wild design choices. I remember the first cold start. Turn the key, wait for the glow plug light, listen for that sewing machine from hell clatter as the Detroit diesel woke up. The cab filled with the sweet metallic stink of JP8 and the earthy tang of CARC paint baking on the firewall. Outside, snow muffled everything except the low growl of a truck that did not care if the world burned. That is the myth the CUCV was built on. When the lights go out, this thing still turns over. And if you are the kind of person who trusts steel and diesel over silicon and plastic, you get it. That is why the legend stuck. Pop the hood on a CUCV, and the first thing you see is a slab of Detroit iron that looks more at home in a locomotive than a Chevy truck. That is the 6.2-liter J-Series diesel, 900 pounds of cast block, all business, no frills, no plastic covers, no sensors, no computer waiting to glitch out. Just steel, oil, and a compression ratio that will light off anything from diesel to jet fuel. Even filtered waste oil if you are desperate. The Army wanted a motor that would run after the lights went out, and the J-Series delivers. It is all mechanical, no spark plugs, no electronic timing. Every drop of fuel is metered by the Stanadyne DB2 injection pump, a cam-driven chunk of aluminum that does not care about EMP or bad weather. You can hear it at idle, ticking away like a clock wired to a stick of dynamite, pure analog, pure reliability. Cold start in the field. You turn the key and watch for the glow plug light. The resistor bank under the dash starts buzzing, feeding 12 volts to the glow plugs, while the Detroit clatter builds under the hood. The smell hits you first, raw JP8, a hint of unburned hydrocarbons, and that metallic tang of CARC 6014 paint cooking on the firewall. No modern truck gives you that. When it finally fires, it is not a polite purr. It is a sewing machine from hell, every combustion stroke shaking the fenders and rattling your fillings. Now, the real power is in the power flow. The CUCV runs a dual-alternator setup, two 100-amp, 24-volt units mounted side by side. That is not just for show. The military needed a truck that could jump-start a tank, run field radios, and still keep the lights on. The alternators feed a 24-volt bus, heavy enough to power winches, blackout lights, and the NATO slave port up front. From there, a resistor bank steps the voltage down to 12 volts for the glow plugs and standard accessories. It is a hybrid system, half military, half civilian. No fancy control modules, just big copper wires and old-school relays. If you are worried about EMP, this is the setup you want. Pull the batteries, ground the bus, and the truck will survive a nuclear event while your neighbor's F-150 turns into a brick. Forget the myth that this is a tank. It is not. But with a drivetrain built for war, axles rated for abuse, and an engine that laughs at modern fuel standards, it is as close as you will get to battlefield hardware on the street. The secret is in the simplicity, steel, diesel, and a wiring harness that does not need a degree in software engineering to fix. That is why, when the grid goes down, the CUCV keeps rolling. You want to know why the CUCV is more than just a civilian Chevy in camo? Crawl under the front bumper, and the first thing you will spot is the NATO slave port, a rectangular 5-pin monster. This is not some decorative plug. It is a direct tap into the 24-volt artery of the truck, designed so you can jump-start a tank or run field radios, even if the rest of the convoy has gone dark. I have used that port to wake up dead M60s. Try that with a Silverado and see how far you get. Spin around to the transmission tunnel and you will find the TH400 3-speed automatic. There is a reason old-timers swear by it. The gear set is all steel, no plastic, no fragile electronics. First gear is a 2.48:1 ratio, enough to get this 6,000-pound brute crawling up a muddy embankment or dragging a broken-down generator trailer through axle-deep ruts. When it shifts, you feel it, a metallic slam that rattles your boots, not some polite click. That is the sound of a gearbox that has been through more convoys than most mechanics have had hot meals. No torque converter lockup, no computer to fry, just hydraulic pressure and heavy-duty clutch packs. If you break a TH400, you did something very stupid or very brave. Now let us talk axles, the goldmine hiding under all that peeling caulk paint. The M1008 pickup runs a Dana 60 up front and a full floating 14-bolt in back, both rated to haul a 5,500-pound payload. That is not a typo. The rear axle is built for war, 1-to-1 gear ratio, solid steel, and a Detroit locker that will snap back into engagement with a bang if you get too frisky on gravel. The M1009 Blazer, on the other hand, gets a Dana 44 up front and a Dana 60 rear. It is lighter, with a payload closer to 3,500 pounds, but the articulation is better for off-road recon. Either way, you are looking at hardware that will survive potholes, artillery craters, and the kind of abuse that would turn a civilian Blazer into a yard ornament. Civilian half-tons, they wish they had this kind of backbone. And before someone gets carried away, let us clear up the tank myth. The CUCV is not a tank. It is not armored, it does not crush cars for fun, and it weighs a fraction of what a real tracked vehicle does. But with axles rated for a 1-ton payload, a transmission that laughs at abuse, and a NATO port that will juice up a deuce and a half, it is as close as you will get to battlefield steel without treads. That is the genius. A light utility truck, built from civilian bones, but with a drivetrain that is pure military muscle. If you know, you know, the axles are where the legend lives. Anyone who has ever had to limp a broken Humvee off the range wishes they had a CUCV instead. Beneath the dash of every CUCV, the resistor bank sits like a row of metal cartridges, each one a gatekeeper between military-grade 24 volts and the 12-volt demands of glow plugs and radios. On a cold morning, turning the key sends a surge, 40 amps or more, straight through those resistors. Their job is to bleed off enough current to keep the glow plugs from frying, all while the dual alternators pour in raw power. Each resistor is rated for 60 watts, but that number is theory. In practice, with sub-zero starts and field repairs, the insulation cracks, mounting studs loosen, and the heat begins to pool. Airflow under the dash is almost non-existent. Every cycle dumps more heat into a cramped metal box, pressed against insulation and plastic trim. Over time, thermal cycling pushes the temperature past 100 degrees Celsius. The housing can crack. Terminal screws can back out. When that happens, a split-second arc is all it takes, just enough to ignite the insulation or melt the dash harness. What starts as a routine cold start can turn into the sharp sting of burning epoxy, smoke curling up from behind the dash. Mechanics know the signs. The wait light flickers, an acrid scent hangs in the cab, and the dash feels hotter than it should. The Army's maintenance bulletins called for 6-month checks, but in the field, you learn to look every time the weather drops. One cracked insulator, one loose terminal, and you have a fire that no fuse will stop. This is the flaw hidden in the CUCV's design. A system built for wartime redundancy, but with a resistor bank that runs hot, runs hard, and sometimes burns. Years later, too many fires and too many close calls led the government to pull these trucks from civilian sales. The danger always traced back to that little box of resistors, sweating in the dark, waiting for the next cold start. There is a reason the CUCV wound up on the government's blacklist, and it is not just bureaucratic paranoia. Crack open the GAO memo from 1994 and you will find it in black and white: resistor bank fire hazard, restrict civilian resale. That little box of resistors under the dash, sweating every time you crank the glow plugs, became the Achilles heel of a truck built to survive the apocalypse. Too many field reports of melted harnesses, scorched insulation, and cabs that filled with smoke after a cold start. The Army's own maintenance manual told you to check the resistor bank every 6 months, but out in the wild, nobody stuck to the schedule. One winter, I watched a buddy's M1009 fill with the smell of burning epoxy. He barely had time to yank the battery cables before the dash started smoldering. His words stuck with me. I would rather face a mortar barrage than another under the dash fire. The ban was not just about a few melted dashboards. Court rulings in the mid-90s backed up the restriction, pointing straight to the resistor bank as a public safety risk. The fire hazard was real enough that the Army pulled CUCVs from auction, locking them behind chain link for years while they figured out a retrofit. Only after a retrofit program swapped in ceramic resistors and thermal cutoffs did a handful get released under a tightly controlled waiver. That is why you rarely see a true, unmodified CUCV on the civilian road. Most were either demilitarized, stripped for parts, or quietly scrapped. Now every old-school CUCV owner will tell you about the other mechanical time bomb, the harmonic balancer. There is a rule, passed down in every forum and garage. Replace the balancer rubber every 100,000 miles, or risk snapping the crankshaft clean in half. The Army's own directives never made it official, but anyone who has pulled a cracked damper off a 6.2 diesel knows the truth. Ignore the balancer, and that iron block turns into a grenade. I have seen a balancer walk itself off the snout, chewing the timing cover and leaving the crank looking like a twisted pretzel. The manual might not spell it out, but in the field, it is gospel. Inspect, replace, or pay the price. That is the legacy: 1 foot in battlefield toughness, 1 foot in mechanical roulette. The CUCV could outlast a nuclear winter, but leave a cracked resistor or a tired balancer unchecked, and it will cook itself before the world even ends. No computer, no electronic control unit, no digital lifeline to fry. Just steel, copper, and a mechanical heart that shrugs off the apocalypse. That is the CUCV's secret weapon. Every modern truck is one solar flare away from rolling over dead. But this thing, with its analog guts, will keep running after an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, after lightning, even after your neighbor's F-150 turns into a driveway ornament. The Detroit diesel up front does not care if you feed it diesel, JP8, kerosene, or filtered motor oil. So long as it burns, it will run. The Stanadyne DB2 pump meters every drop by cam and lever, not by sensor or chip. You can lose every fuse and relay in the dash, and the engine will still fire if you have compression and fuel. That is why every prepper, every off-grid diehard, wants one parked out back. When the world goes dark, this is the truck that keeps moving. If you are thinking about running a CUCV on the street today, you need to know 2 things: the retrofit kit and the axles. After the Army's retrofit push in the mid-1990s, most surviving trucks received a ceramic resistor bank with thermal cutoffs, a fix that finally tamed the under-dash fire risk. If you are wrenching on one, look for the stamped part code CR125RX. No kit, no keys. Simple as that. Now the real gold is under the frame. The M1008 got a Dana 60 front and a full floating 14-bolt rear, both rated for 5,500 pounds. The M1009 Blazer uses a Dana 44 up front and a Dana 60 in the rear, lighter but better for off-road flex. That is the split: truck for payload, Blazer for recon. The last government auctions in the late 1990s only cleared trucks that passed the retrofit. Miss that detail, and you are rolling the dice with a fire hazard. If you are keeping one alive, check your resistor bank, check your axle tags, and never trust a CUCV that has not had the retrofit. That is the mechanic's last word. Right now, when trucks drown in sensors and plastic, the old CUCV still starts with a whiff of diesel, a glow plug weight, and a Detroit clatter that drowns out Bluetooth everything. The world's gone digital, but grid down, it's still the analog iron that gets you through the blast zone if you check your balancer. Some machines never stop running, civilization just runs out of nerve first. Drop your war stories in the comments.